Hey lady, welcome to the Grit, Growth, Grace podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Anne-Marie. I'm wife to James and mom to 4 beautiful kids, plus 1 miscarried baby, from 9 months up to 8 years. My hope is to help other women experience the postpartum period, all the way up to the first year of baby's life, as a time of grit, growth, and grace. This is episode 15. Hey lady, today let's talk about low libido postpartum, which I will define as I have less interest in sex than I used to or less than I would like to have. I want to start by telling you what this conversation won't be. It won't be about spilling the tea on some secret novel sex position that's going to make everything better. In short, it won't be graphic. It will be respectful of your relationship with your spouse. It will also assume that some major reasons for low libido aren't at play here. Among those major reasons, number 1 would be current or past use of porn by you or your spouse. If porn consumption is or was a problem for your spouse, it would make perfect sense for you to feel unable to measure up, especially with your postpartum body, to photoshopped fantasies. If, on the other hand, porn consumption is or was a problem for you, it would make perfect sense that you'd feel unable to perform, and or that your spouse couldn't measure up to what you see, watch, or otherwise experience. A tremendous resource for men who struggle with porn is Matt Fradd's Strive 21 program, and for women, there's Magdala Ministries. Other major reasons for low libido would include unresolved trauma from past sexual abuse, for which a faith-based counselor would be an excellent starting place, but I'm not addressing those major reasons for low libido here, whether during postpartum or at any time. And I'm not addressing the low libido that can come from from hormonal birth control use. I'm addressing a more run-of-the-mill variety that new moms experience. There can be so many questions about what's normal, mixed with a fair amount of shame and confusion, plus a concern about where to look for answers that will be frank but not overly graphic, and won't encourage you to try things that conflict with your morals or values. I also want to make clear that, of course, this isn't the definitive conversation on this topic. Of course, low libido affects women in different ways and to different degrees. You might wonder, how can we even begin to talk about it in generalizations? Well, in fact, I hope that after this conversation you'll think, oh, she should have said this, or oh, she should have mentioned this, or oh, I wonder about this thing, because that will mean you're engaging with the topic yourself, not downloading some thought of mine. As I've said before, and I'll say again and often, take what serves you and leave what doesn't. I used to, and still sometimes have a tendency to, read or hear another person's opinion or experience and immediately judge my experience against their own. Surprise, surprise, that old saying, compare and despair, was right on the money. Either I would judge myself to be lacking and feel small, or I would try to tear apart or invalidate the other person's thoughts if they didn't match my own. What I've found to be more useful instead is the image of sifting for gold. Lots of thoughts and ideas pass through our minds every day. We get to decide what to keep and what to let pass on through our fingers. Perhaps the best question for a conversation about a sensitive topic like this one might be, is there anything useful here for me? Now here's why I wanted to address this with you. Some months ago, I found myself in the back of a minivan after a Bible study, talking with 2 women who I care a lot about having less interest in sex during pregnancy and or postpartum. At one point, I realized we were on sacred ground. We each of us wanted to love our husbands well, knowing that they are good men who sought to love us to the best of their ability. We all of us knew that when we were less interested in sex, our husbands were sometimes tempted to take that low interest as reflecting on them, as a lack of interest in them. We each of us wanted to honor our own feelings, not treating our bodies as objects by saying yes to sex we weren't actually emotionally interested in or physically ready for. And we each of us understood that sex was created by God and is a gift of self, an exchange of persons. It's not mere copulation, the way animals come together for reproduction and then go their separate ways. It's not an itch we scratch or scratch for our husbands. Sex means something. I was thinking, too, about a non-denominational group for young brides I joined almost 10 years ago. The woman who ran it had her heart in the right place and wanted us to have happy marriages. Still, I stopped going after a few months because the answer to great intimacy for her was to look cute and sexy for our husbands. Sex was how we loved our husbands. I asked questions in my head like, what if we can't have sex with our husbands? Like if we just had a baby? or I'm sick, or he's on a business trip. How do I love him then? Perhaps not coincidentally, this woman also believed that you shouldn't try to have a baby right away after you got married. And if the goal is to be sexually available to your husband, I can see why she would say that. Pregnancy and postpartum don't exactly always lend themselves to sexual availability between the hormones and fatigue and everything else. What's more, if the goal is to be sexually available but not have kids right away, then you'll need birth control to accomplish that feat. I didn't love where any of that led. So back to the minivan conversation. I realized then that this topic was more universal than I expected, and here are a couple thoughts about it. I think some low libido during postpartum is for obvious reasons and is more or less inevitable. The reasons aren't a surprise to either of us, you or I, but perhaps we'll run through a few here just to remember that new motherhood, however many older children we may have, is a big shift. We throw the word hormones around like candy sometimes, but can we recall together, for a minute, that there's a massive hormonal withdrawal after birth as the surging estrogen and progesterone from pregnancy take a nosedive? I used to think this was a bug of the system, but now I see it more as a feature, a built-in invitation to slow down, to rest, to recover, to bond. In fact, this is a big part of where my tagline, Postpartum on Purpose, came from. What if that massive hormonal change were on purpose? Now, just because something's natural doesn't mean it's not painful or shouldn't be supplemented and relieved in some way. We live in a world after the fall, after all. But if that massive hormonal shift leads us to a kind of vulnerability, a need to depend on others, for us as mothers to be mothered, might that be an invitation? And with that hormonal change, doesn't it make some sense that our interest in our babies would be very high and our interest in other things would be lower? Instead of asking, is something wrong with me? Could a better question be, doesn't this mean that something's going right for so much of my focus to be on this brand new baby? Let's add in any vaginal tearing or lacerations or other physical injuries you may have sustained or C-section scars. I know after my first child I tore, and at 6 weeks the doctor did a pelvic exam and told me I was good to go to resume sex. But my body did not feel healed until 3 months postpartum. If you're emotionally interested but still tender or sore, could purposefully slow and gentle sex be helpful? I can't remember which baby this happened with, but I also remember that low estrogen related to breastfeeding can lead to vaginal tenderness too. And in that case, a prescription for vaginal estrogen cream might be of some help. Not before sex. It's not meant to be like a lube, but just do you use it every day for some period of time to help with that low estrogen related tenderness. Breastfeeding's effect on hormones can also lead to vaginal dryness, aka very little natural lubrication. Who is surprised that with little lubrication, a woman might not enjoy sex as much? An odorless lubricant, nothing fancy with irritating scents or chemicals added, can go quite a way in helping with vaginal dryness. I did read somewhere that coconut oil is not the best, but I can't recall what the reason for that was. Painful sex is a great reason to go get evaluated by a pelvic floor physical therapist, and pelvic floor PT will be all its own future episode because I'm a huge cheerleader for every single mom being evaluated by a pelvic floor PT after every single birth. So those are some basic reasons why sex may not feel that enjoyable, especially in your baby's first few months of life. My experience this latest time around was that my interest or desire increased very gradually over time and had the most significant rebound after I stopped breastfeeding altogether at 12 months, which was surprising to me because I'd weaned so gradually that I was cutting out just one feeding a month, meaning that I'd been only nursing once a day between months 11 and 12. So it was surprising to me that even with just that tiny shift from one feeding to no feedings, that I noticed within the first month after that a real difference. I think the touch factor can also be involved in low libido, and by that I mean it's the end of the day. I am touched out. I've been touched by the baby, by my older children, and by the dog who shed all over my black workout shorts. I do not want to be touched by anyone else right now. That is all. If you want to want sex more, but are feeling touched out, could you get a little curious about whether there are certain places you don't want to be touched as opposed to everywhere? And perhaps we could substitute the word feelings for touch. It's the end of the day. All of my feelings are run out. I have very little emotional energy left to give to anyone. For women, emotional connection and intimacy are such a key part of pleasurable sex, are they not? We are not robots. We may need time to unwind from anything stressful during the day, and then time to ramp up. We're usually not 0 to 60, even when we aren't pregnant or postpartum. Pope St. John Paul II, of all people, addressed this difference in the curve of arousal for men versus for women in his book, Love and Responsibility. Fascinating that he gleaned that insight from counseling hundreds, perhaps thousands, of couples over the decades of his priestly ministry. If you're touched or feelinged out at the end of the day, could you switch things up and make time in the morning, maybe on a weekend day? Anne-Marie, the kids are in bed. The kids are in our bed. Anne-Marie, the baby is not sleeping through the night. Anne-Marie, that would never work. Okay, lady, it doesn't have to work for you. Just putting it out there. But what if you're emotionally depleted? Several episodes back, when I talked about strengthening your marriage during postpartum, I mentioned how women want to be noticed. A listener asked me to address that in a bit more detail. I think a woman, in order to feel valued and secure in her marriage, needs to feel noticed, to feel mysterious, alluring, captivating, intriguing, to others in some sense, but especially to her man. She needs to feel that he is attracted to her beauty, her intelligence, her good humor, her quick wit, her intentionality in caring for others, her bravery in killing spiders all by herself. I don't know how to make this happen. I can only speak to my personal experience. My husband asks me every single day to marry him. Every day, at least once. I want him to notice me, to choose me, over and over again, especially when my belly is poochy, and 13 months later, it still is compared to the rest of my body. For my part, it's taken me many years to notice that he was noticing me. It's taken me a long time to believe him when he tells me I look beautiful or how attracted he is to me, even in my ridiculous cupcake pajamas. I did not for a long time listen to him, did not believe that he meant what he said. I wonder, is there anything your husband says to you that's become like background noise? I also want my husband to notice what I do to show up well for our family. I want him to notice or appreciate that I cleaned the bathroom, or I bought him chocolate syrup, even though it has 0 nutritional value, or I negotiated a better rate on our car insurance. I want him to notice my efforts. 10 years in, he's gotten better than that. And part of why is because I've told him specifically over time the ways I want to be noticed. That's right. I don't leave him to figure it out, and I've more or less stopped trying to do something cleaning related, hoping he'll notice. Bonus points if he does, of course. I tell him right out, babe, I did X because I love you and I love our family. Maybe that doesn't sound romantic, but there it is. And I talked in the previous episode about noticing him as well, and how it is a give and take, right? I want him to notice me, and then I also notice him. So I'm not saying here, he just needs to do everything for me and I owe him nothing. No, but I'm simply saying if we're talking about low libido during postpartum, that there can be a component, I think, of needing to feel more noticed by our husband specifically. Especially early on in postpartum, when I'm giving till it hurts every single day. I want my efforts for our new baby to be noticed by my husband. And maybe part of why I'm not ready for sex is because I know that I'm giving more than he is, physically and emotionally. I'm not referring to some kind of pity party or power play. I'm referring to the facts. Having a new baby costs me more, at least very differently, than it does him. And since I breastfeed, and even several months later, I'm still going everywhere with this precious baby attached to me, that's different too. Part of being interested in sex is needing to know that he grasps how big a deal this is for me. That all is not business as usual, even after he's gone back to work and I've resumed homeschooling the kids, etc. Perhaps especially, actually, when things are more or less back to normal, perhaps especially then, do I need him to understand that the demands on my time and energy are all still considerable. You might be thinking, this all sounds very vulnerable. I couldn't just come out and tell my husband what I want him to say or notice. Maybe you think he should already know. Maybe you're sure he won't get it. Maybe you're afraid he won't respond in the way you want. I hear you. Those are real fears. And I don't know your situation. You might be right. But what if you tried? And what if you didn't give up? What if you knew he was capable of understanding eventually? How would you speak to him then? Could a counselor or a Catholic mindset coach help you gain confidence in approaching these kinds of vulnerable conversations? Could you also try skin-to-skin time? You're familiar with skin-to-skin time between baby and parent already, but on a marriage enrichment retreat back in our first year of marriage, we learned about couple skin-to-skin time. The idea is to learn to be completely vulnerable, both emotionally and physically, with our spouse. There is no clothing involved. You are just held by your spouse. It invites us to learn to relate to each other very vulnerably without the expectation of sex. This can help maintain feelings of closeness, especially in those early healing weeks when sex isn't on the table, but also later on, and even in times of abstinence, after your cycle's returned. You might be thinking, what? 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 Perhaps you could just try it and see. Early on in my editing work at Natural Womanhood, I edited an article on laboring in a hospital. The author wrote that a woman in labor needs to feel the same warmth and security and protection that she feels when she's having sex. No harsh lights, no cold, sterile room, etc. I just wonder, on a practical level, is your bedroom temperature warm, not too drafty? Do you feel cozy and secure there? Can you relax in your room? Is it clean enough for that? But what about, leaving that to the side? What about when you're flat out uninterested? Perhaps I saved this for close to last because it's the most vulnerable. How will you choose to respond then? There was one time this postpartum when I was not feeling in the mood, but I knew he was, and I felt guilty. And notice I don't say that he made me feel guilty. I say that I felt guilty for being uninterested. So I decided to just fake it. And it was miserable. I'm not telling you anything we've not already discussed, my husband and I. I decided I would not do that again, would not knowingly operate on a mismatch between my emotions and my willpower when it comes to sex. Sex is meant to be free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Sex that I'm not actually interested in is not a free gift. And I don't want to treat my body like an object, as if I could separate my physical actions from my emotions during such an intimate act. So that's now off the table for me. And it isn't some girl power, I call the shots, power anthem, gatekeeper role. It's a respect for my body and for my relationship thing. The last thing my husband wants is for me to feel used or to wonder if I'm just pretending. He wants my pleasure. Let's let this be the last thing. What do you do when you're not interested and you know your man's feeling a little low? Please hear my heart. I'm not saying he's trying to guilt you, which is not a feature of mature, respectful relationships. I'm saying you know that he wants to love you in this way, and that while his head understands that it's not him you're rejecting, his heart isn't on the same page. Maybe it looks a little pouty. Maybe it looks like a touch of frost or distance. Maybe he's not trying to act like a disappointed little kid, but it's coming out that way a little because vulnerability and emotional honesty are hard. I know you may be tired and not want to summon up the fortitude to call him on without berating him or giving in and faking it. But may I extend the invitation to say something like, "Love, I'm not interested. I know you want so much to show me you love me in this specific way. I want to love you in this specific way too, but I'm not interested tonight, or I'm not interested right now. Tonight, I'm inviting you to show me your love in a different way." If you have ideas for specific things that would help you be more in the mood, like more help around the house, or his side of the room being cleaner, or needing to feel more noticed, go ahead and tell him those things. Manhood in general, and fatherhood in particular, call our men out of little boy selfish ways and into mature self-gift and self-sacrifice, protection, and provision. You and I are calling our men on to self-gift. It is not a pleasant or pretty task sometimes, but we can trust that they are capable of growth, of rising to the challenge, even if not at first, even if imperfectly. If you have the good fortune to have a wise old married woman in your life to be a sounding board on all this, all the better. If not, a faith-based, marriage-friendly counselor can be so helpful. Well, mercy. As the character Sam said and told John Wayne's character Big Jake in the movie Big Jake, that's more words than I said since Anonia. I guess you got an earful, lady. I hope something of it served you. If you're wanting more specifics, in this week's email, which you can sign up for at postpartumonpurpose.com, and I'll put the link in the show notes, I'll share several specific resources for growing your marital intimacy. For next episode, let's dial things back a little bit. Let's talk scaling up chores for our big kids when a new baby arrives. I'll talk to you then.